Francesca McDonagh is the CEO of the Bank of Ireland Group. She's with me in New York. Nice to be. You're at least in New York, even if we're not in the same room together.
And that's correct, Richard. Great to be back.
And that's welcome. So, from a bank's point of view, besides obviously the appallingness of the nature of what's going on, what's your major concern here?
So the major concern, other than the awful humanitarian crisis, is the impact that two countries whose GDP collectively is just over 3% of global output is having such far-reaching impacts on inflation, interest rates, which obviously I imagine we're going to talk about, and also GDP growth. And what that means to the real economy of businesses and households in our home market of Ireland is obviously creating a level of uncertainty, particularly when we started the year really focused on the positives of recovering from a post-pandemic environment. And the narrative in Ukraine has fundamentally changed that.
Yeah, but what I think you're beautifully describing, of course, is our growing realization of the interconnectedness in the global economy. Yep. This 3% is actually leveraged because of integration.
Absolutely. And you've seen supply chains be really stressed as a result of COVID. And as they recover, you're now seeing them frayed further by what's happening to energy prices and commodity prices, particularly food. And the economic burden of war is very uneven. So that will really impact lower income families or businesses that are still getting back on their feet after the pandemic.
So let's take Ireland. First of all, 2 years ago, you have Brexit. And then you have the end of the transition period and the full thing. And then you have the pandemic, which hits you hard as well. And now you have this. All in all, it's a miracle that the Irish economy is still standing.
I wouldn't call it a miracle. I think it's a result of actions that have been taken by the state, but also by businesses. So at Bank of Ireland, we just announced our full year results. Yeah. We had a rebound in our performance, and that's as a result of the economy recovering, but also difficult strategic decisions that we've taken. And we still remain optimistic and positive about the future, despite geopolitical uncertainties. And the Irish economy, the fundamentals are actually very strong. So you've got a young, well-educated population, very attractive place for foreign direct investment. And I've been speaking to American businesses here in New York who want to invest or increase their presence in Ireland. It is the only native English speaker in Europe, given Brexit. And there's some real positivity across a range of industries for investment. And also the domestic, the indigenous economy has managed to grow in 2021. Right. So there's still positivities despite the uncertainties, as you mentioned, of Brexit and the reality of 2 years of pandemic.
So the UK's had maybe two interest rate hikes, and there's more to come. Today we saw the first of the Fed, and there could be 6 ahead. Now the ECB is some way off that, but having seen what these other economies have basically had to do, I'm guessing you think it's going to be the same for Europe.
Yeah, so the Fed is not alone in having an increasing interest rate outlook. So we've got the Bank of England meeting tomorrow. We have part of our business in the UK. We'd expect a 25 basis point hike there. I think the market is already pricing that in. But for Europe, for the ECB, there's a lot of debate around this, and we would have talked about interest rate increases before the invasion, with inflation increasing. But we would now expect 1, possibly 2 rate hikes by the ECB during 2022 to get to 0%.
It's going to be a very different world in the sense. I mean, that sounds a bit trite, but you know what I mean. We are seeing nothing like we've ever really experienced, because Brexit, global financial crisis, then you had Brexit, then we had the pandemic. All of these are much greater shocks than the systems were designed for.
They are, but they've also shown us resilience and the importance of adapting. And I tell you one thing, if there's any positive that's coming out of it, and I was just watching your previous stories about sources of energy, it's the whole ESG agenda. So under the cover of COVID, ESG went mainstream with much more awareness around environmental impacts of how we consume and how we run our businesses. But I think now, as well as the environmental awareness, we're seeing the political impact of being dependent on energy from Russia, and a country that is now heavily sanctioned. And that could, if there's one positive, there could be a catalyst over time for change and a shift away from Russia and fossil fuel dependence to more carbon neutral, renewable, energy efficient solutions. Now, the irony is we'll probably take a step backwards before we make progress, because we've all seen reports of Germany firing up its coal factories and stockpiling coal sources in case it gets cut off from Russian energy sources. So maybe that's a step backwards, but over time, this could be a catalyst for more awareness from businesses, from policymakers, from consumers about the source of energy and reducing that dependence on countries like Russia.